You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I'm your host, Carl Dumler, and joining me today, as always, is my good friend and co-host, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, how are you doing, buddy?
Doing pretty well. It's beautiful today here in sunny Iowa City. Unfortunately, maybe this is part of being an adult, but I feel like the fall and this year, all the good days fall on weekdays. And then when the weekends come, it's snow, cloud, rain, wind. So gonna hopefully try to get outside after this, but we'll see. Just enjoying looking outside and seeing a little bit of sunlight now, because I know it's going to get dark from now until about April on a lot of days. Dark and dreary.
I understand. I was just checking the weather. My family and I are heading down to Arkansas tomorrow. So very, very excited about that. But it looks like it's going to be mid-50s. I'll take it. I'll take that. That's not bad. Nice little jacket weather. I can take it.
Heck, that's shorts weather.
It's true. But no, so I'm excited about that. But very excited to get to talk Broncos football with you today. Is obviously lots going on with this team. And so we want to make sure that you can find us on Twitter, because we always talk Bronco football there, of course. You can find me at Carl Dumler MHH and Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. And you can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. And make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating, as we value your input on our show. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, a new affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Also know that this podcast is powered by Overtime Media.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Well, Nick, the Broncos are down to their final two road games this week against the Texans, next week against the Chiefs. And really, two of their toughest games on their entire schedule. And just watching this Texans team, especially this offense, is exactly what you want to see the Broncos become in the future, wouldn't you say?
Hopefully a little bit better offensive line play. That said, they've obviously maybe even given up a little bit of the future to help their offensive line play. But it's a lot of fun. A lot of weapons. Hopefully the Broncos can be a little bit better at the tight end position and offensive line. But, quarterback, solid stable of running backs, two great wide receivers. It's fun. There's no doubt about it.
For sure. Yeah, it's crazy trying to keep up with this group. And I saw this week I get the tough matchup instead of you.
For once.
I know. It only took us to week 14.
Yeah.
But here you go. So, no, I'm excited to talk about this team. But just looking at their offense, like you said, this is an offense that's loaded. And right now they are 9th in total yards, 4th and third down offense at 46% completing on third down, 10th in points at 24.4, 15th in turnover differential. That's something to kind of keep an eye on. They're not really the biggest turnover machine, but they're also not one that turns the ball over a whole lot. And then 12th in passing offense at 243 yards per game. 5th in quarterback rating. They have one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. One I definitely wish the Broncos had.
Yeah.
Even with Drew Lock looking okay. Yeah, Deshaun Watson, he's a star. But no, some other areas where they do struggle a little bit. They are 22nd in sacks allowed. Like you said, that offensive line is not great. But
I do want to point out, but I'm the worst. I'm interrupting. Offensive line isn't great. Sacks, pressures, hits, all of that stuff. People like to really use that to hammer home the offensive line, but that's as much a quarterback statistic as anything. And Deshaun Watson, great quarterback, definitely can make some wow throws down the field, the leadership, everything you want. He does have a tendency to hold on to the football and definitely hurts his offensive line in those statistics. He a lot of those sacks, I'd have to go through one by one and try to assess blame, but I would reckon a lot of those sacks are on Deshaun Watson.
I think Pro Football Focus put 9 of them on Deshaun Watson.
Okay, that's a good number. It's pretty high.
Right. So, yeah, when you're talking, a fourth of the sacks being on the quarterback, just kind of shows a little bit of where things are at. But no, there's still some holes in this offensive line, and I'll talk about that when we get to some of the game planning. But no, otherwise they are something that a little bit surprised me, just because so much attention is given to Deshaun Watson. They are a very good running team.
Mm-hmm.
They're 7th in rushing yards per game at 129.8, 4th in yards per carry at 4.8, 2nd in 20-plus yard rushes, and 3rd in 40-plus yard rushes. And so, I mean, yes, some of that is Deshaun Watson, don't get me wrong, but it also is they have a good 1-2 punch at the running back position, a little bit kind of like the Broncos, where you got the guy up the middle and Carlos Hyde, and then they got the guy that can take it, that can slash, that can be a receiving option for him, and Duke Johnson. And
he's a good receiver too.
Yeah,
I'm a little bit jealous of them.
Yes, he is. And so it is kind of one of those things. They can attack you anywhere, wherever your weakness is. It could be one of those where Duke Johnson is featured one week, Carlos Hyde featured the next week. And so just something we're going to talk about here a lot more as we get into this. But anything really stick out to you then beyond? I mean, like I said, for me, it was the rushing offense being a lot more potent than I thought it was. And go ahead.
Yeah, you know me. I really like to go into the advanced statistics. I just wrote a 4-page article on adjusted net yards per attempt and how that correlates with the Broncos offense and Drew Lock. And so, yep, we're definitely nerding out here. But I really like to talk about DVOA from Football Outsiders when talking about these, because it takes into account the schedule, weather, a number of factors, and kind of adjust it. Obviously, football, a game with a lot of codependent variables. You know, quarterbacks doing well depends on the scheme, the wide receivers, the offensive line. You can move those all around. You know, it doesn't matter. They're all depend on each other in different ways. But DVOA is kind of one of the better ones out there in terms of kind of digging through the BS and taking the raw stats and putting a little bit of weight on them so we get a better indicator. The Houston Texans offense, according to DVOA, the 8th best in the NFL, behind Minnesota, Green Bay, Dallas, Kansas City, Baltimore, and Seattle. Yes, that's right. For the pass offense, they are 7th best, and for rushing, 18th best. So a lot of these stats, I think the cumulative stats you're seeing with the run game are because Texans, kind of like the Broncos, have gotten to some early leads and then been able to kind of just grind games out a little bit more effectively than the Broncos because, hello, you have DeAndre, Hopkins, Will Fuller, and Deshaun Watson. But, you know, that's a big part of it. Defensively, the Texans have been not great this season. Obviously, losing J.J. Watt would do that to you. But on the season, they rank 25th overall, which is, you know, obviously not great, but the Chargers being 23rd. I've seen some narratives out there that the Drew Lock and the Broncos offense could do better this week, and that might be true because the Broncos have to play catch-up a little more because obviously the Texans offense is pretty darn potent, but the defense is not great. It's the pass defense is 25th ranked, and the run defense is 15th. So hopefully Drew Lock, you know, with the pass defense not being as good, J.J. Watt being out, no Clowney anymore, he can take a little bit of advantage of that. If the offense lets him, obviously the guys need to execute, and we want to see a little bit more, I would call it aggressiveness. I know Scangarello obviously had a little bit of a different standpoint. What's he going to say with his press conference, I think was today. But that's, I think this is a game the Broncos have been one that have been very dependent on the run game, one of the highest rate of running on first and second down, and that we saw that again last week, maybe even more so. I don't have the data right in front of me, but it did feel like the Broncos very much were running it almost on first and second down every chance they could to kind of keep the training wheels on Drew Lock's bike, so to speak. But it's definitely an interesting area to watch. But it's a good offense, a solid run defense. But if the Broncos are going to win this game, honestly, it probably comes to the passing game. Not all Drew Lock, but the passing game balling out a little bit.
Oh, for sure. You're right. I mean, right now the Texans are 25th in quarterback rating allowed at 99.5 and 29th in pass yards allowed at 262.9. And like you said, a lot of times they're playing with the lead. And so I think some of that is some garbage yards that get thrown in there. But it still does show a little bit that this is a team that they play kind of a bend don't break on defense because they know the offense is going to go out there and score a lot of points. And so the Broncos offense should have some opportunities. And I do think a little bit, I've been thinking about this a lot this week, just when we're getting to some of our game predictions and stuff like that. The Texans just had one of their biggest games of the season against the Patriots and had a great game. And this seems like that kind of trap game. Get to come home, play a team that's had a losing record, hasn't been that great, out of the playoffs pretty much, all that kind of thing. And so I do think that could be a possibility a little bit in this one, that the Broncos maybe could catch them off guard at the beginning. And then one last thing I do want to say about the defense. I saw this stat and I wanted to see if maybe you could guess it. But there is a mystery stat that the Texans are dead last in on defense. Can you guess it?
Ooh, can I get another hint? If not, that's okay.
So you just talked about them being the Broncos being a team that ran on first and second down.
Okay.
What comes next?
The Texans have run the ball the least on third down this season.
No. I was thinking of still leaning on the defense here of the Texans.
I don't know. Just tell me.
Okay. They are dead last in third down defense.
Interesting. And Drew Lock, we talked about the offense being they didn't execute the best and left some yards out there. Obviously, they also kind of had some cheating yards as well. Drew Lock had a big chunk of yards on that Hail Mary that didn't get to the end zone. But that is interesting in an area, obviously small sample size with Drew Lock. That's an area that I hope that we can really see some flashes from the quarterback this week. For sure.
And like you already said, with J.J. Watt going down, no Clowney, they haven't had the greatest pass rush.
Whitney Merciless is the biggest one left that I can recall.
Right. And their cornerbacks have been really banged up this year, the entire secondary, really. So there are going to be some opportunities for the Broncos, especially on third down, to take advantage of some opportunities. This will be a little bit of an easier game, I'd say, for the defense or for the offensive line. I mean, I'm not saying, let up or anything like that compared to last week when they had such a good game. But, so there's going to be some opportunities to attack. And I'm kind of excited to see what this Broncos offense can do, maybe when they can cut loose a little bit more this week.
Yeah, and before we get to a break here, if you have a little bit more, I did want to talk a little bit about their personnel usage on offense. So obviously, Bill O'Brien, the head coach of the Texans, famously last year after Vance Joseph kind of messed up the in-game scenarios at the end, he said some cuss words directed at Vance Joseph being an idiot. And, that was maybe, in hindsight, I don't know, I'm not going to. Sometimes I let it go on here. I'm worried we're going to get that E rating on the podcast sometime. But yeah, I'm not being a proponent of calling somebody an effing idiot. But he did that last year. But looking at the Texans' overall offensive skill set, how they use it, they're really, really heavily an 11 personnel team, running it at 62% of the time. They do like a lot of 12 personnel as well. The two tight ends running that 31% of the time, which is one of the top 5 usages of 12 personnel in the NFL. However, they are very much a team that they would, if Andy Janovich was there, he would be getting maybe 2 snaps a year. Let's see how many snaps they've actually used a fullback this season. 14 plus 10. So 24 snaps in 21 or 22 personnel. So this is a team that believes in the wide receiver, believes in the tight end, not so much that power high. So a lot of shotgun, a lot of that kind of stuff. Then overall, they've been pretty successful. Out of 11 personnel, they're averaging 5.7 yards per carry and 8.5 yards per pass attempt, which is, really good. 103.9 passer rating out of 11 personnel. And then even better out of 12 personnel passing the ball. Granted, that's across the league. 119, 7.7 yards per attempt. Don't run the ball as effectively out of that. So going to be an interesting unit that's really going to stress the Broncos' defensive back depth, which is, heck, we saw it against teams that, like the Bills, not a great passing team. Broncos showed they have some issues at cornerback in that game against Josh Allen, so does concern me a little bit. I don't know if the Broncos defense matches up that well against the Texans. Granted, the Texans don't have a great offensive line. The Broncos might have Von Miller back. No Derek Wolfe. That is going to be a major loss in the run game and the pass game. But this Texans offensive line, not the best. Obviously, they traded for Tunsil. Max Sharping, second-round pick from last year, has been playing pretty well, but they did just have to put their first-round pick, Titus Howard. I think he had a meniscus injury in his knee. And do you know who the Texans' starting right tackle is now?
I do. Chris Clark.
There you go. Yep, former Bronco. Not great. Former Bronco. So, honestly, he's like one of those swing tackle guys. He's stuck around the league for a long time. There's something to be said about that, but Great starter, not so much.
Right. I was going to say, I think he started the last few games for him. He did a little bit of, I think he played some left tackle at one point, but no, mostly there at the right tackle spot. And actually, if you look at it on his per snap basis, he's giving up, I think, the most pressure of any of the players on their offensive line right now.
Not surprising. And that's not a fantastic, pass rush division. Yeah, obviously the Colts have issues in the pass rush. They have Justin Houston, but they're looking for more help there. The Titans, Harold Landry has played great this year. Justin Simmons is merging. Jarrell Casey good with the Titans. And then Jags, Yannick Ngakoue has been solid this year, not as great, and they've just kind of fallen off defensively this season. I mean, Doug Marrone feels like a dead man walking, so it will be interesting. Laramie Tunsil, probably one of the best 3 to 5 offensive tackles in football, but again, I've said it on here 100 times. One great offensive lineman only moves the needle so much. You need to have a good unit. So that's obviously they've been attacking this. They spent their first 2 draft picks on it. They spent their next 2 first round picks with getting Laramie Tunsil. And obviously Nick Martin, the younger brother of Zach Martin, their center, but it's still not a great offensive line. Granted, like we said at the beginning, part of that falls on Deshaun Watson and his propensity to hold on to the football, which can create big plays, but can also create negative plays.
And I do want to point out one thing here real quick of Laramie Tunsil. Okay. He is known for getting penalties.
Yes, he can get penalties. Holding sometimes have been an issue with him. Has that been as much this season? I feel like it sparked up again at the beginning of the season when everybody was getting holds. I mean, I know that because we have a 1-inch vantage point with the Broncos, Garrett Bowles getting holding penalties like crazy drives us nuts, but the holding penalties were up like at an insane rate across the league, and I feel like that's kind of fallen off for not only Garrett Bowles, but obviously Tunsil as well.
So he has 13 total penalties on the season.
Not the best.
Nope.
I'd still take him.
Right. Well, yeah, I would too. But I'm just saying that is one area that he does struggle a little bit. And I mean, honestly, if I'm a team, would you rather your left tackle hold or give up the sack?
I'd rather them use good technique.
Well, yes, you would. Okay. But if you only have the 2 options, you'd rather them not give up the hit on the quarterback. Plus, it saves a down. Yep. So, that's something just to keep in mind when you're looking at them. Like I said, offensive line wise, they've really struggled this year. Just none of them have really looked all that great. Nick Martin has done pretty good, I would say. He'd probably be their second best offensive lineman on the season. But like I said, those guards, and then of course now with Chris Clark, that's where you really want to attack. And we'll talk about that more as we get into some game planning options here for the Broncos, especially now that they might not have Von Miller again this week. And, well, we already know that Derek Wolfe is done for the season. So they're going to have to generate some pass rush in some other directions.
Do you think we will see DeMarcus Walker activated this week?
Oh, very much so.
They probably have to.
Yeah. I don't think there's much option there. And I mean, and he's a great pass rusher. So so far this year, that's been his strength. So it's nice to see that, but it does worry me a little bit about the run defense. There's going to be a huge drop off from Wolf to Walker for sure. And this is where Gotsis, well, yeah, and Jones too, because he hasn't really been used much as a run defender.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to do some mixing and matching, and some guys are going to have some of their better games. And I mean, this is one of those games, especially for our linebackers and Todd Davis and the dinosaur, that they're going to have to really get through some blocks, I think, to make some plays.
Man, what a great nickname. It's just so basic, but it's just so great. I love it. Well, all right, we should probably take a break here. We will be right back to talk a little bit more of the Broncos Sunday matchup versus the Houston Texans. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. I am Nick Kendell, along with Carl Dumler. Carl, it's time for the Coach's Corner. We're going to be trying to disseminate this. That might be the wrong word. Go through this Texans team, there were strengths, there were weaknesses, and this week, for the first time in a while, like we hinted at earlier, I get the easier matchup with the Broncos offense versus the Texans defense, but I think everybody's more interested in what you have to say. Obviously, we have Drew Lock. Maybe they're more interested in what I have to say, but I'm personally more interested in what you have to say because you have the harder matchup in trying to contain the Texans offense with a defense that played well last week, but there are some holes due to injury and just personnel that are rearing their head more and more that I am concerned about in this matchup.
Understandable. And, the Broncos, it's one of those games where you just got to work to contain. You're not going to hold them to 0 points. Let's just get that off the table. And most teams, you're probably not going to hold to 0 points anyway. But this is a powerful offense. It's one of those where that red zone defense, the Broncos being one of the best in the league, is going to have to really step up and be that in this game. They're going to give up yards. They're going to probably give up a couple big plays because that is what this Texans offense is trying to do is really push the ball down the field. But I'm going to start with the run game first. The main thing with the run game, you have to know who's in the game. Carlos Hyde, he really is that pounder up the middle that they just really want to, right now, just to give you an example, when he's running between the left guard and the center, he's averaging about 6.8 yards per carry. Between the center and the right guard, he's averaging 5.2 yards per carry. Now you get to the outside, he's only averaging about 3 yards per carry when he's running there at the left tackle or the right tackle. So you don't really have to worry about this guy going for a long run trying to get to the outside. But you have to know when he's in that they're going to crash the middle of the field. And then on the other side of it, you got Duke Johnson. And you got to understand this is a guy that he's going to obviously try to get to the outside. He's got that speed. He's got that quickness. Obviously, they're going to use him in the pass game, so you never know quite exactly what's coming at you when he's in the game. But he really is. He's such a phenomenal player in so many different directions. I wanted the Broncos to get him. I love his game. Because like you said, that's the kind of game that you're seeing teams really try to go after here in the NFL. He's not the fastest guy, but he's quick, I guess is the best way to put it when you're looking at him as a player. And so again, you got to know who's in the game.
Perfect Patriots player.
Yep, exactly.
Hence why Bill O'Brien wants him. They don't really care so much about the fast. Obviously, when they had Randy Moss, you're not going to turn down Randy Moss. But that ability to be matched up against linebackers in space and be quick and nuanced in the pass game and take very high completion percentage throws and turn them into more. That's like Locke said, you don't go broke taking a profit. And that's exactly what it is. However, you're stealing a little bit more every time. Right.
And then, but just to give you an idea again of how good he is, right now he is averaging 12.7 yards per carry running over the left tackle. Now that is Laramie Tunsil. But again, that just kind of shows where he wants to get. On the right tackle spot, you're looking at about 6 yards per carry. So, again, this is a very efficient running game that they have. One that they know how to use their players, that they're going to put them in a place of strength. They're not going to ask Duke Johnson to do a whole lot up the middle. And so when he's in the game, you have to tell your edges that they have to work on contain. Don't let him get to the outside. And push him back to the middle where your linebackers can clean things up. When Carlos Hyde is in, obviously you got to crowd the middle, cut off those little lanes because he's got some pretty good vision to be able to get through and pick up the hard yards that they need. And of course, then you got their quarterback that you got to worry about taking off running at any time. And so, yes, this is going to be a tough game to contain the run game, but I think they can do it as long as they pay attention to who's in the game. Now, pass game. This is obviously the focus that everybody kind of wants to hear about. And this is a game where, again, the Broncos are going to have to look for matchups. They're going to have to look for players, not really so much about the scheme. You're going to have to understand who's on the field. When you got maybe one of the best wide receivers in the entire game, DeAndre Hopkins, I'm sorry, don't leave Chris Harris one-on-one with him a whole lot. I love Chris Harris, but he's not winning that matchup.
You want to put him on Will Fuller?
No, I don't. And that's why I'm saying this is a game. I do think you're going to probably play a lot more zone. because you're going to want guys that aren't going to be asked to go one-on-one with Will Fuller. I mean, that's setting up anybody for disaster. It's not going to end well. Will Fuller's going to beat you over the top. I was going to joke that maybe the only way to really win this game is for Will Fuller to have one of his classic terrible games where he drops like 3 touchdowns.
Like the Chiefs game?
Yes.
Man, it was insane how easy he was getting open and just missing the football. Just mind-boggling.
Yep.
You can go ahead. I remember that game. Like, oh, easy touchdown. Will Fuller dropped it. Mm-hmm. He did all the hard stuff. You know, his ability to get separation, I mean, vertically, and just the speed that he has, insane. And then he would drop it. I mean, just such a boomer bust player. But I mean, that's what you get with such an explosive down the field kind of guy.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that offense, it does. The explosiveness, the ability to score points really is determined by what kind of game Will Fuller is having. Because he does have quite a few games where you see probably at least a couple touchdowns that should have been touchdowns. I mean, he really could be leading the league in touchdowns if he could catch. I have stats here for you. I have his game log up from this season. He has played in a total of, he obviously was injured weeks 8, 9, 10, and 11. So he's played week 1 through 7 and then 12 and 13. So how many games do you think he has touchdowns in this season? He has 3 total touchdowns. How many games do you think he has touchdowns in? You said he has 10 total games?
He only has 3 touchdowns on the year, and he's played in 9 games. I'll just, we'll put the ring around here. He scored all his touchdowns in 1 game against the Falcons, where he had 14 receptions on 16 targets and 3 touchdowns for 217 yards. I think I went up against him in fantasy that week because that really looks like it's hurting me. So for some reason, just staring at it. Yeah. But other than that, I mean, again, boomer bust. It's another reason that, like, if the Broncos take a guy like Henry Ruggs, and there'll be some games where he only gets 2 targets. Is that worth it? Well, the spacing he creates and that just the threat of that big play is valuable. But again, low volume, boomer bust kind of guy. Against Indianapolis 2 weeks ago, 140 yards, 7 receptions on 11 targets. Last week against the Patriots, 1 reception, 8 yards on 2 targets. So, it's really, you're really never going to know what you're going to get with him in that regard. But my goodness, he scares me.
Right. Well, then they also have Kenny Stills, who can take the top off as well.
And Kiki.
And I mean, Hopkins, I don't have any problem with him going deep either. He's not going to beat you over the top, but if he's one-on-one, you still throw it up to him. So, I mean, again, this is a team that wants to get deep. It's why their quarterback has taken quite a few sacks this year just to let their guys get down the field, try for the big play, and it's worked a lot. I mean, he's one of the best deep ball quarterbacks in the league. And so, I mean, that's part of it is you got to work to shut it down. And it's why the run game's also been successful because a lot of teams have to play 2 deep safeties. And when you can't have them crashing down the run game because you're so afraid of being beat over the top, it opens things up. I mean, it's what the Broncos would love to see, with Drew Lock, of his ability to beat teams over the top and force teams to have to keep an extra safety back there. So, now, pass game, again, beyond the deep ball, I mean, this is, you're going to have to play a lot more 2 deep safety. You're going to have to play some zone to try to keep up with a lot of this kind of speed. This is going to be one of those games where communication is going to be one of the biggest things. I think this last game was probably some of the worst communication we've seen in the secondary. I don't know what was going on. I mean, guys running into each other. Chargers players left wide open. You can't have that in this game. No. I mean, this is one of the smartest quarterbacks in the league, and Deshaun Watson. I mean, I love his breakdowns after every game of everything that he saw on the field, and just he's got to be one of the smartest quarterbacks in the league. And so, yeah, you're not going to do well if you're not having great communication back there.
No, but and one thing about the Broncos defense also is that I believe. This is data I saw probably 2 weeks ago, so it might have changed since then, but they were the 2nd lowest team in terms of average depth of target behind the Patriots. So what does that mean? It means the Broncos, much like the zone defense, much like what Fangio's done historically, but they really like to keep everything in front of them. It's a big reason why you have a little, like, tackling is non-negotiable for this Broncos secondary. You know, people keep mocking Grant Delpit to the Broncos in the first round. Then, you know, I don't want to put out too hot of a take out there because if it happens, I'll look really dumb. But I really don't see that happening just because Delpit doesn't tackle, and that is a big. They keep everything in front of them, rally to the football, and that's the biggest thing. But a reason that I'm concerned with guys like DeAndre Hopkins and his yak ability, and also you kind of touched on it, the running back in Duke Johnson.
Right. And you're right. I mean, you got to keep things in front of you because probably the area that Watson does struggle the most with is those short and intermediate throws to the outside. Mm-hmm. He is great over the middle. Right now, he is thrown for 1,612 yards, and this is not including any passes behind the line of scrimmage. So just understand some of that. But he has 12 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, 122.7 passer rating when throwing over the middle of the field. And so this is a guy that you're not going to do well if things are open up the middle. Now, the short and intermediate to the outside, this is where I think a little bit, he doesn't have the greatest arm in the NFL. I mean, it's good. It's just not great. And so you can have some opportunities when he's thrown to the outside, especially to his left side. He has a quarterback rating of 67.8 when throwing short or intermediate. So that means 0 to 20 yards. That's the area where you want to have to force him to throw. And so, I mean, otherwise he is just outstanding everywhere else. And I mean, he's going to get his. Again, this is going to be a game where the Broncos are going to have that red zone defense continue to show up to take away some throwing lanes. And then, as you already said, they're going to have to tackle well. I mean, Watson, one of the things that he tries to do, like you already said, is he'll hang back there. He'll try to break a tackle. There's a couple plays where the Patriots had him dead to rights, and he somehow escaped. I mean, his helmet had to be like 2 inches from touching the ground, and somehow he still escapes the tackle and then completes a play down the field. And so for the Broncos, they can't miss those plays. They don't have the offensive firepower to keep up to miss those kind of things. And this year they've had a couple of those things where quarterbacks somehow escaped on them. I mean, that Von Miller play in Indy, that's still that play. I still have no clue how that happened. But again, this is going to have to be a very sound game from that defense. They're just going to have to communicate well. And if they are attacking in a blitz, attack those guards, attack Chris Clark, and just hope that you can get home, because Zach Fulton, he's given up 22 pressures. Zach Sharping, the 2 guards, 21 pressures. And so this is probably one of those games you got to unleash the dinosaur. Just let him attack up the middle. Let him do his warrior cry as he attacks and do his little dance as he gets the sack. It wouldn't surprise me if the Broncos defense is doing well if Alexander Johnson ended up with like 3 sacks in this game.
Yeah, it's possible. I do wonder if the game plan would change that a bit. I just think the Broncos offense has to do enough to make the Texans be not conservative. And as we've seen this season, specifically early on, teams did not respect the Broncos offense and would, get a lead and play conservative ball. And that, that can hurt you. That can come back to bite you. But as the Broncos have shown this season, but it's just, again, you're trying to, it's very much an NFL style thing. It's like college. You see these teams get boat raced, and the part of that is because obviously you're trying to get style points to get higher in the rankings and get a chance at the committee. But in the NFL, it's all about the bottom line, the win or the loss. So you are playing differently depending on the game situation and the opponent. You're not trying to go win 55-0. You're perfectly happy winning 17-3 if that's what it takes. So it'll be interesting. I just think the Broncos offense, can they do enough to stress this Houston's offense enough to make them be a little bit more aggressive, make Deshaun Watson throw that ball that could go the other way, make those 5-step, 7-step drops where the Broncos defensive line might be able to get through and make some plays. So that's the biggest thing for me. Like, how much respect do we see from them early on in the game flow if the Broncos can afford, being aggressive like that and sending AJ and racking up those stats and sacks and whatnot.
All right. Well, then how do the Broncos attack on offense then?
Well, I'm glad I didn't have the one that you had, because it's definitely difficult. I am thinking that a guy like, if you're playing daily fantasy football, obviously Hopkins would be expensive, but I think that we saw last week Austin Eckler victimized Todd Davis a couple of times. That's going to happen. Eckler's a really good pass back, but, we could see Duke Johnson have a pretty good game this week. I think that's the guy that I'm concerned about most. On this Texans defense, though, it's a banged-up unit. It hasn't been great this season. They have two high-end, or not high-end, but rookies that have flashed high-end traits. Charles Omenihu, a guy that many people thought would be a top 100 pick last year from the University of Texas. 6'5", about 280, and he's been kind of their own version of Draymond Jones this season. Probably a little bit twitchier and a little bit longer, but not as nuanced as a pass rusher. Played a long edge kind of player for Texas. Now he's playing that 5 technique, the 3-4 defensive end, and he will come in on sub packages. So he's concerning for me. We've seen Dalton Reisner a few times, especially the last few weeks. I think that foot injury has impacted him a bit. And granted, sometimes you're just going to get beat. Ed Oliver, fantastic player, beat him a couple times. And then last week they schemed up Melvin Ingram to get some one-on-ones on Dalton Reisner. And Dalton Reisner got beat on a few times. So definitely worried about Charles Omenihu as this kind of sub-package rusher. I think that's where they're going to get their most organic pass rush. And with the Broncos offensive line and Drew Lock being a guy who, they didn't get sacked last week, but I think a part of that was game plan. Omenihu is one that you want to have circled. He's kind of an intriguing, unique player and fun to watch. Other than that, DJ Reader, number 98, is another guy I want to talk about. He was a 5th-round pick back in 2016 from Clemson. Kind of slept on, but man, he has turned into one of the better two-gapping nose tackles in the game. Really hard to move him off the point of attack. He can push the pocket as well, but really he's just there to muck things up, and he does a good job there. So I'm a little bit concerned about the Broncos' ability to run the ball. Obviously, the Texans have been a much better run-stopping team this season than a pass-stopping team or a pass defense team. Their main guy that you want to look out for as a pass rusher, former first-round pick from 2017, and Whitney Merciless, strong side linebacker, never been a truly dominant player, played third fiddle when you have J.J. Watt and Jadeveon Clowney, obviously, but, he's one that you can run at, but he can get his as well. So I'm a little bit concerned there to see how he matches up with the Broncos tackles. They also have some depth edge rushers as well. I mean, Barkevious Mingo, they got in that trade from Seattle in the Clowney trade. Jacob Martin as well has racked up a few sacks. They do miss Jadeveon Clowney. I mean, it's obvious to see on tape. His impact, his ability to be kind of an amorphous pass rush where, he's lined up at 7 technique, he's lined up at 9 technique. Now he's in a 2-point stance over the A-gap, just that kind of stuff. Totally. I mean, we had to play him last year. I did a film article on it. That ability is, I can't think of many players that have his skill set. So they definitely miss that on top of J.J. Watt. Probably my favorite duo on this team are the 2 linebackers. Zach Cunningham, he is not always the best at getting off blocks or at the point of attack as a linebacker. I think Fangio would have some issues with him because Fangio is very much a strict personnel guy, or strict in terms of his linebackers needing to be able to come up and be solid in their run fills, and haven't always seen that with Zach Cunningham, 2nd-round pick from 2017 out of Vanderbilt. But Zach Cunningham is so long. He plays that weak inside linebacker spot, and because of his length and range, he can get his hands on guys that it doesn't make sense. It's a little bit of a slender man thing kind of going on there. My favorite player on this defense, Benardrick McKinney, a 2nd-round pick from 2015. I remember watching him at the Senior Bowl being like, man, this guy is a tank. Honestly, he reminds me a lot of A.J. Johnson, 6'4", 250 pounds, and again, a guy that if he's in coverage, if it's a simple short, shallow zone kind of thing, not a big deal. He's so long. He's got instincts. He can do that fine. But if he's tasked to play, outside of that at all, or has to turn and cover in man coverage, it can get ugly. So that's a guy that he's same thing as AJ Johnson. It's really a similar player. In that same vein, he's really, really dangerous in A-gap blitzes, and they use him there fairly often. So number 55, I mean, he looks like a Madden created player at linebacker. He's gigantic and strong and eye black and pretty horrifying kind of guy. I'm a little bit concerned. I hope that maybe we can see Philip Lindsay stand up next to him at some point in this game, because it would be a stark difference. In the secondary, honestly, this is something that's going to hurt a little bit, but probably the best cornerback playing, as far as the play this season, on the field in this game is going to be former Denver Bronco Bradley Roby. He's coming off a really good game last week. I believe he had a forced fumble and an interception against the Patriots, and he's been playing good this season. I mean, they obviously bet on himself and doing pretty well. And I'm guessing not to the extent that Shaq Barrett did, but I'm guessing he's going to get a pretty good contract next year. So watch out for him. Obviously, there's some revenge factor. I'm not ready to obviously say he's better than Chris Harris Jr., but Chris Harris Jr. has not had the best season. Broncos cornerback too, outside of that, has been, I mean, let's just be completely honest, it's been just an absolute terror, not in a good way. And Bradley Roby is a guy that maybe would have been nice to retain. Obviously, you can't retain them all with how the money is. It's a capped league, but Roby's playing well. Jonathan Joseph been up and down this season. They traded for Gareon Conley. He's more of a cornerback 3 for them. And then Monty Johnson, super big, super long, super physical from Kentucky, the other rookie on this team. But he's still got a ways to go in terms of the technical aspects of the game. Outside of Benedict McKinney, my favorite player on this defense is probably third-round pick Justin Reed. He was phenomenal last season. He's been really good this season. He plays free safety for them next to Tashawn Gibson, but Justin Reed is a guy, can play that single high role, really smart, good coming downhill. He's not going to kill guys over the middle if you're hitting him with the crossers, but a guy that'll take the ball away. And that throw last week where Drew Lock missed Hireman because he didn't, square his feet, didn't square his release, and it sailed on him. And luckily for the Broncos, it fell harmlessly to the ground. That's a throw this week where if he does that, there's a chance Justin Reed is not only picking that, but taking it the other way. So something to watch for there. For the Broncos this week, again, I think it's a week. Obviously, what I would do is I would let Drew Lock throw the ball around the yard. The Broncos don't have the best wide receivers outside of Cortland Sutton, but I'm going to be aggressive. You got to be aggressive, I think, to keep up with this Houston offense. And I know they have the training wheels on the offense, but I say screw it. Drew Lock, if you have the training wheels on there or you take them off and you let him ride by himself, he is going to probably make some mistakes, and there's something to be learned in those mistakes as well. Does he have that mentality to bounce back and keep going at it? And what does he learn from those mistakes? So I'm trying to take those training wheels off if I can. I could see the Broncos playing hyper conservative once again, running the football on first and second down and then hopefully getting it to be 3rd and 5 or less and then trying to convert. But I'm trying to hit them early. I'm trying to punch them in the mouth. I'm taking shots down the field. I'm trying to isolate not only the running backs against these linebackers, probably Royce Freeman because Philip Lindsay hasn't really showed up as a pass receiver this season. But Noah Fant, he didn't have the best game last week. But again, Zach Cunningham and Benedict McKinney, it's kind of like the Broncos at the off-ball linebacker spot. They're big, they're long, they're solid in the run game. But if you ask them to get in man coverage specifically, but if they're isolated in coverage against a tight end, especially one with Noah Fant's athleticism, there is a chance for some explosive plays overall. So really, I'm just looking to be aggressive. I know that Drew Lock has a chance to make some mistakes, but with these linebackers and how this defensive line has stacked up right now, I'm not letting them get into their pass rushing set and then teeing off. No, I'm hitting them on first down when I can, play action when I can, and throwing shots deep, hopefully getting Sutton and Noah Fant, maybe even Tim Patrick on some vertical shots and getting those chunk yards. And that would be a big difference from the Broncos' game plan last week with the Chargers. Obviously, the air yards per attempt, I think it was like 4.6 for Drew Lock, which doesn't even, for all the qualifying passers in the league, that would be like 0.3 yards lower than any of them, which is, that's a pretty statistical significant difference when you're operating in those margins. But really, I'm looking to be much more aggressive, take shots, and go try to win in a shootout, as crazy as that sounds. If you get a lead, then you can kind of play a little bit more with the run game, control the tempo that way. But I respect this Houston offense too much where I think if you're going to play that conservative, you're going to get beat.
Very nice. I like it.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
they scare me, man. The Texans, they're peaking right now. Maybe they're peaking at the wrong time, but if you caught that New England game last week, granted, this New England team is probably pretty overrated, but this is a team that seems like they're starting to figure out who they are, what they want to be, and they're feeling themselves. Now, they're not the Ravens. Obviously, they're not that caliber of team, and I don't think they are the Chiefs at full strength. Even the Chiefs' defense isn't good, but Patrick Mahomes in that offense is something else. But I would say this is probably the third best team in the AFC right now, maybe behind the Bills. Yeah, I don't trust the Patriots.
I don't either.
Patriots are right in there. I just think it's so stupid. Maybe I'm just trying to convince myself that the dynasty's ended. They get in freaking, it gets cold, and then all of a sudden, like they're like White Walkers or something. It gets cold and they just start coming out from nowhere. So really, I mean, one of the better teams in the AFC, playing really good right now. They scare me. I think if you go into this game trying to be too conservative and being too scared to let Drew Lock play, you're going to get beat. So you got to Drew Lock is a peacock. You got to let him fly.
Yeah, I can't disagree. One of the things I guess that does stick out about the Patriots, you look at their best wins, and they were all when the teams were struggling early on. But now that they've actually started getting things going, like they beat the Steelers week 1, 33-3. But that was when the Steelers were not looking that great. They started 0-4.
Yeah, they were very bad early on.
And then they beat the Bills in week 4, 16-10. But I mean, the Bills have been one of the hottest teams. I'm very excited to watch that Bills Patriots game. I think it's week 16 is when they play each other to see where those teams are at now. And so now they head to the Chiefs. That'll be a great game this week. Maybe the game of the week. And not often that you get to see the Patriots possibly lose 2 times in a row here. So, yeah, I mean, really their schedule has made them look a lot better than they really are. But Houston definitely dismantled what was most people were calling a defense that was on a historical run there for the first about 8-10 weeks of the season. And lately it's not definitely been going in that direction for them, giving up quite a few points. So you're right. This is probably one of the tougher games the Broncos are going to have the entire season. Factor in it's on the road, noon start time. This is, I mean, if the Broncos can figure out how to win this game, I'll be downright impressed and pretty much say I wouldn't have a problem saying Lock's probably the future for at least next year. And this team, I'd be excited about the coaching staff. I mean, this is one of the toughest games that they're going to face. But we're going to talk about that here just a little bit when we get to some game predictions and things like that. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll get to our final section here.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, and welcome back to Building the Broncos. I'm Carl here with Nick as usual. And Nick, before we get to our game predictions, I have just a couple questions heading into this one that people have kind of been talking about this whole entire week. Game number 2 for Locke. What does he have to show you to build on his last game and start making you a believer that he's the future?
Well, just take some baby steps. Obviously, we talked about the air yards per attempt and also his average net yards per attempt were concerning. So it just needs to be more consistent in that regard. But again, how much of it is personnel? The Broncos wide receivers outside of Cortland Sutton, those guys would be wide receivers 4 and 5 on an average team in the NFL. The tight end outside of Noah Fant, who's been up and down this season, obviously. You had that couple bad plays last week where hopefully he makes that play next season, but that's a concern. Jeff Hireman, honestly, like I said, was probably the offensive player of the game outside of Cortland Sutton. So that is an area I'm looking for. But just, let the moment not be too big for him. You don't want to see him totally spiral if things get out of control, not be careless with the football when they are behind. But that's the biggest thing for me. Just continue to grow. Obviously, progression isn't linear. There'll be times where he takes a step forward and 2 steps back. That's going to be the case not only through the rest of this season, but next season as well. But just continuing to grow, have that swagger, and give this team a chance. The energy he's bringing, some of the balls he's able to throw. It's stuff like that really, with the statistics, and like I said, I did the article with the statistic, that is... You want to see something like that over a multiple game sample size. It's a 1-game sample size. Should we read into it too much? No. Is it something to monitor? Yes. But with the eye test, with that 1 game, you can see he has the arm talent. You can see the teammates rally around him. You can see the athleticism. You can see the moxie. So that's stuff that I want to continue to see him grow. Something I do want to see him improve on, which I don't think is going to happen in this week, is the footwork completely. Obviously, when he's playing with off his platform and kind of going around there making some odd passes off his back foot, not the greatest footwork, he can get away with that accuracy-wise when it's kind of around the line of scrimmage. Those little dump-offs, check-downs. You can do that there. But when it's a little bit further down the field and you're not playing with a clean base and a balanced base, that's when the ball is going to have some issues, and that's when it had issues in college, and we saw that again this past week. So seeing that more, seeing the growth, and really just seeing him continue to go out there, take punches, get back up, and go out there and make some plays.
All right, something you talked about there kind of spurs on this second question, and this is getting into just a quick draft discussion. And maybe a little bit of free agency as well here, but which is a bigger need for this team next year, tackle or wide receiver? I mean, we're coming off of Garrett Bowles, maybe one of his best games of the season. Wilkinson didn't look completely terrible last week. You got Juwan James possibly coming back this week. And you already said that the Broncos, even on an average team, their guys behind Courtland Sutton would maybe be a 4 or 5. So which one do you see right now would be a higher priority on your list that the Broncos need to fix this next season?
Okay, well, I'm going to be annoying. Are you talking specifically as in like fixing for the 2020 season, or are you talking about the long term of this team? Because Wilkinson, I still think is a guard playing tackle, although he has been playing better as of late. And both Garrett Bowles and Juwan James, they're probably their last season is next season. So either way, I think tackle is very high priority the way you look at it that way. Now, granted, you could probably survive with Garrett Bowles and Juwan James playing, or even Elijah Wilkinson playing tackle next year, more so than you can with Sutton being your only wide receiver, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I guess, let me put the question this way. You have a wide receiver and a tackle rated the same in the draft, and your pick comes up. Which one are you going to take?
Well, I'm going to be annoying again. I'm just the most annoying person. I know.
Come on.
So, again, positional value. Tackles are harder to find. And the depth of this wide receiver class, talking about it the other day, tweeting about it the other day, there's a bunch of Z/slot kind of guys that I really like in this upcoming class. I mean, Brandon Ayuk, KJ Hamler, Jalen Reagor, Marquez Stevenson, Devin Duvernay, probably even a couple more that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. Those are guys that I'm thinking probably, Devonta Smith, guys that I'm thinking go round 2 to round 4. So I think there's you're going to see a bigger run on offensive tackles early. So I'm probably going to take that tackle if they are rated the same on my board, just because I think I'm more likely to find value at wide receiver later on. But if we were talking, straight up, if I could add an average player right now to this team, and for the rest of the season, what would make the bigger impact, adding an average tackle or an average wide receiver to play opposite Sutton? I think that wide receiver might actually be more impactful, because you are getting better play as of late from the tackles. Granted, part of it is scheming, part of it is the Munchak effect. That's all part of it. But what they are getting from Deshaun Hamilton, Deontay Spencer, and Tim Patrick right now is just absolutely unacceptable. You can't get by with it. This is right. This is right now. It looks like we're running out there outside of Courtland Sutton. It's a wide receiver core you'd see in the third quarter of a preseason game. Yeah. So it's not good enough, and it's hurting this offense. It's crazy what Sutton's. It's kind of a little bit of a double-edged sword here, where on one hand, wow, Sutton's getting bracketed and safety shaded over him constantly. Imagine how good he'd be if they actually had another wide receiver the other team had to expect. Well, that's true. On the other hand, he's getting force-fed the ball like crazy because the Broncos' other options are not good. So, you can look at it that either way. But I think right now, as far as the rest of the season, that wide receiver 2 and 3 spot is more detrimental to this offense than, honestly, the tackles, which is crazy to say. But, we've seen them improve since the bye week. Obviously, moving on from Joe Flacco's statuesque ability is helping them. It's a guy that can do a little bit with their legs, even if it's just creating for a second, creating some new throw lanes, buying time. But that wide receiver position outside of Sutton is barren. Deshaun Hamilton, we saw him last year play okay. I've never been a fan of the overall athleticism or the yak ability, and I always thought that Tim Patrick was rather one-dimensional. He's an athlete, but he's really just linear, if that makes sense. If he's running a 9-route deep, you can get some usage from him, but is he going to be doing stuff after the catch? Is he going to take a slant to the house? Is he running nuanced routes from the slot or the Z position? That's not really his game. He overlaps a lot what Sutton does, but Sutton does it at just such a higher level and can bring so much more to the table. So that's another big reason I'm not a big fan of T. Higgins in this draft for the Broncos. Just way too much overlap in that kind of that niche. But as my fiance or my wife would say, a long walk to a small glass of water. I think that probably taking the tackle there, but wide receiver, if you can pick one average one for this game, that's probably the way to go because Hamilton / Patrick just not getting it done.
Yeah. No, I just think this is going to be an interesting discussion as we get into the draft talk a lot more. I know everybody keeps harping tackle. Well, that wide receiver position is pretty glaring right now. It's pretty crazy how bad it is behind Courtland Sutton. And like I said, I mean, you already said it of this draft being pretty loaded at wide receiver, but at the same time, some of those guys there in the first round, if the top 2 tackles are gone, I don't think Bronco fans should be all that upset if a wide receiver is taken. I mean, it's like I said, it's still a deep position, but you still got those top 3 guys that you're looking at. You already said of Henry Ruggs. I mean, can you imagine what he could do taking the top off the defense where teams have to respect that, of how much that opens up the run game? I mean, we could go into that a lot more, but we still need to finish up here with some of our game predictions and things like that. So right now, Broncos are 9-point underdogs. I mean, one of the bigger spreads they've had this entire season. The over-under is at 42.5, which is kind of interesting. They're expecting
pounding the under.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be more low scoring than people think.
Well, I mean, something to keep in mind here. Broncos have gone under in 16 of their last 21 games. Texans have gone under on 8 of their last 10 games at home. So both teams, this has been, and the total has gone under in the Broncos' last 3 games against the Texans. So again, this is a game where a lot of teams, I do think, do go a lot more conservative in their game plan against the Broncos, because it is kind of if you can score 20 points, you're probably going to beat the Broncos. And I mean, what was it? Week 7 of last year, before the last time they scored over 25 points in a game, or 25 or more.
It's been 84 years.
Pretty much. That's how it feels. So again, this could be a lot lower scoring game than some people expect. It is kind of a strength on strength, Broncos defense against their offense, and weakness against weakness, Broncos offense against their defense. And so there could either be lots of fireworks or there could be absolutely nothing. And this is one of those, battle in the trenches, field position kind of games. But, Broncos win if blank for you.
Whew. The Broncos win if... Sorry, I'm racking my brain trying to think of something clever here.
Well, I got one, so you can think here for a second.
Okay.
If the Broncos give up less than 2 pass plays that go for 20 yards or more. They can give up 2. If they give up 3, it's done.
I'm going to go with the Broncos win if they are... if a wide receiver not named Courtland Sutton can give this team over 50 yards in receiving yards.
That's a good one. I like that. All right, Broncos lose if blank.
The Broncos lose if they get behind in double digits. I just don't see them being able to come back.
Right. That makes sense. I'm going to go Broncos lose if they give up over 4.5 yards per carry. If they can't stop the run, there's no way they're stopping Watson either.
Yeah, that's a good one.
All right, MVP if the Broncos win is...
I think the MVP if the Broncos win will be... I'm going to go Noah Fant. I was talking about him earlier. I think that he has a chance to have a bigger game this week. Didn't have the best game last week, but they really need a number 2 weapon to emerge in this pass game, and we harp on the wide receiver, but you know what? They drafted a first-round tight end. Granted, folks, we know there's a latency period there. Probably not until year 3 we really know what Noah Fant will be. But I think Noah Fant, the athleticism and everything there, they need that guy to emerge, and if Noah Fant has a big game, I think this team wins, so I'm going to give Noah Fant the MVP there.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give it to Kareem Jackson.
Oh, okay.
Just a little bit of him getting to come home to Houston here. But also, I mean, he has an opportunity to make some big plays. They're going to need him to really step up, to be a great tackler coming down the run game, to also be able to stand back there, help in the deep passing game, because they're going to take their deep shots. I mean, that's just a given. And so Kareem Jackson, Justin Simmons, both them guys are going to have some chances to make a play, and they got to make a play. I mean, I think you have to have one of those two come away with an interception for the Broncos to win this game.
Yeah, nope, that makes sense.
All right, GOAT if they lose.
I think the GOAT if the Broncos lose, and it's trending that way, is going to be Rich Scangarello. I feel like people, not only the fans and the media, but even in Death Valley, are starting to get a little bit irritated with Rich Scangarello. Now, is that right? Is that fair? There's probably varying levels to that answer, but I think people are getting a little bit irritated with how good this Broncos team is in the first quarter offensively, and then totally falling off after that, and a lot of that falls on Scangarello's play calling. Now, obviously, he is going to a gunfight with a plastic sword many times. Broncos' offensive line tackles haven't been good, and like we've harped on, the weapons in the pass game outside of Sutton, not good. So that's not the best, but you want to see some growth and improvement, and especially in the game calling, the play calling, and just haven't seen that so far. So I think that Scangarello, if this Broncos team, comes out, plays super conservative, whether it be early on and they fall behind, or if they get the lead and then they go into a shell and the Texans come storming back because, hello, this Texans team is explosive, then I think that Scangarello is the guy that is piled on after this.
Makes sense. I'm going to go Chris Harris.
Okay.
I mean, they've had him lined up against the number ones most of the year, and this is probably, I mean, it's easy to say, top 3 wide receiver. We'll leave it at that part there, and Hopkins. And I don't think Hopkins is a very good matchup for him, just with that size advantage. I mean, Harris does struggle some with the quick speed guys, but some of these size guys can give him a huge problem too. So I could see this being a game where he gives up, 7-8 catches and maybe a touchdown or so. And just the Broncos learn pretty quick that they can't just leave him one-on-one and expect him to win that matchup.
Who are the other 2 wide receivers? You said top 3.
Oh, boy. Michael Thomas, for sure. I mean, I think that's a pretty obvious one. I'm still a huge Julio Jones fan.
Okay.
I like his game as he has just that overall. He has power, he has speed, he has route running, has the hands. I still have him up there. I know a lot of people don't have that, but he would be in my top 3, top 5.
Okay. No love for Mike Evans?
I like Mike Evans. I just don't think he has the all-around game that like a Julio Jones has.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right, and the final score prediction here. Or no, we have the unsung hero. Yet, my unsung hero, if the Broncos win this game, I'm going to definitely go way bottom of the barrel here. He had an okay game last week, and I kind of like the versatility. Obviously, he's not going to be a long-term guy here, but one that has a roll down the stretch. Andrew Beck, fullback, the Broncos that want to use that eye personnel, and they want to use that versatility. I think Beck, if there's something that happens in this game, especially if the Broncos are able to run the ball and make something happen, I mean, Drew Lock dumping the ball off, the Broncos running it, playing very close to the line of scrimmage, Beck's going to have an impact in that. So very much an unsung hero, but if they win, I think Beck has a chance to do that.
I'm going to go the guy that probably replaces Derek Wolfe, Draymond Jones, getting him in there for the run and the pass. I mean, he's definitely shown that he can be a pass rusher. I think he has an opportunity here just to really to take that next leap and show this team that they have a starter heading into next season.
All right. Final score prediction from me. I think the Texans are going to win this one. Broncos will cover the spread, but it's going to be Texans 20, Broncos 17. And I think the Texans actually come back to win. I think the Broncos are going to be winning, and the Texans come back in the fourth quarter and win.
You jerk.
I know.
No, I'll go Texans 24, Broncos 20 in this one. Again, covering the spread, but not quite having enough to get there.
Well, that would wouldn't that put them on the over?
Oh, sorry, covering the spread. I meant the point differential.
Yeah, I know, but
sorry.
you said earlier that you thought this would be an under.
Oh, I did. That's true. I guess I'm taking the over. I'm going the shock of the league here.
Man, he had all this good information here. Like, man, Carl's really digging his, stepping his game up with the betting stuff here. All this data here to support the under. Nope, Carl's taking the over. So
got to go with my heart, man.
Got to go with your heart. That's the way to do it. So that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Nick Kendell MHH. Make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. You can subscribe to the Building the Broncos podcast and all other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.